My name is Brother Crispin, and I've been at St. Mordaunt's Monastery for 8 months now. I need to tell someone about what happens here after Compline. The monastery sits on a plateau in the Colorado Rockies, 3 hours from the nearest town. We're a small community of 12 Benedictine monks following the rule of Saint Benedict, living as men have lived here for over 200 years. Everything seemed normal when I first arrived. The daily schedule follows the traditional pattern: vigils at 4 in the morning, lauds at dawn, the little hours of terce, sext, and none throughout the day, vespers at 6, and finally compline at 8:15. Between prayers, we work in the gardens, kitchen, library, or workshops. We eat our meals in silence while Brother Erasmus reads from scripture or spiritual writings. It's a peaceful life, exactly what I expected when I left my job as an accountant in Denver to answer what I believed was God's call. But there are rules here that go beyond Saint Benedict's ancient wisdom. Rules that were never written down, never discussed during my months of preparation before joining the community. I learned them only through careful observation and whispered warnings from Brother Aldrich, an elderly monk who's been here for 37 years. The first rule is simple. After Compline ends and we begin the Great Silence, no, monk may remain in the church alone. This wasn't mentioned in any of the literature I studied about monastic life. In most monasteries, brothers often stay after the final prayer for personal meditation. Here, when Prior Cornelius gives the blessing with holy water that concludes our night prayer, we file out together, every single one of us. No exceptions. I discovered this rule my third night here. After Compline, I lingered in my stall in the choir, wanting to spend more time before the tabernacle. Within minutes, Brother Aldrich appeared at my elbow. "Come, Crispin," he whispered urgently. "We must go now." "I'd like to pray a bit longer," I said. His grip on my arm was surprisingly strong for a man in his 70s. "No, not here. Not after Compline." The look in his eyes convinced me not to argue. As we walked through the cloister toward our cells, I asked him why. "The church feeds during the Great Silence," he said quietly. "It requires privacy for its meals. We learned long ago not to interrupt." I thought he was speaking metaphorically about prayer and meditation until I saw what he meant. Now, 8 months later, I know Brother Aldrich chose his words carefully. The church does feed, and what it consumes would drive most men to madness. The second rule involves the cloister itself. During daylight hours, our covered walkway around the central courtyard is a place of peaceful movement between the church, refectory, library, and our living quarters. Sunlight filters through the stone arches, and in good weather, we often pause to admire Brother Magnus's herb garden in the courtyard center. But after Compline, no, monk walks the cloister alone. If you must move between buildings during the Great Silence, you find another brother to accompany you, or you don't go at all. Brother Dunstan, who manages our small farm, explained this to me during our work in the vegetable garden. "The pathway grows hungry after dark," he said, his hands shaking slightly as he pruned tomato plants. "It develops additional appetites that weren't there during construction." "What do you mean?" I asked. He paused and looked toward the cloister, even though we couldn't see it from the garden. "The arches multiply when no one's watching. New openings appear between the old ones. They lead to places that were built before our monastery existed." "That's not possible," I said. Brother Dunstan turned to face me directly. His left eye twitched, something I'd noticed happened whenever he discussed the nighttime rules. "Brother Crispin, I've been here 11 years. I've seen monks walk into those extra arches during the Great Silence. They come back changed. Brother Thaddeus went through one last winter. He returned 3 days later speaking in a language none of us recognized, and his teeth had all fallen out. Prior Cornelius moved him to a different monastery before he could teach the words to anyone else. I wanted to dismiss his account as delusion, but Brother Dunstan was one of the most practical men I'd ever met, a former engineer who spoke precisely about everything from soil composition to irrigation systems. The third rule is the most disturbing. During the Great Silence, no monk may look directly into any mirror or reflective surface, including windows at night. Our cells each have a small mirror above the wash basin, and we must cover them with thick black cloth after compline. The windows in our sleeping quarters have heavy curtains that must be drawn completely closed before we retire, and we nail them shut from October through March. Brother Oswald, our librarian, told me about this rule when I offered to help him with late evening cataloging work. We finish all library tasks before compline, he said, closing the catalog ledgers with unusual haste. And we seal every reflective surface that faces inward toward the cloister. Why? He gestured toward the large windows that looked out from the library onto our central courtyard. During the day, these windows provided beautiful natural light for reading and studying. Now, as evening approached, I could see he'd already covered each pane with what looked like layers of black canvas nailed directly into the window frames. The reflections become doorways during the Great Silence, he said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Things use them to visit from places that shouldn't connect to ours. What kind of things? Brother Oswald's hands were visibly trembling now. Monks, but from different times. Some wear habits that haven't been used in this order for centuries. Others wear habits that haven't been designed yet. They stand in the reflections and gesture for us to join them. Brother Gideon looked into the bathroom mirror 2 years ago during the silence. He saw himself, but older, beckoning from behind the glass. When he reached toward the mirror, his reflection grabbed his wrist. What happened? His reflection pulled him halfway through before the glass shattered. Brother Gideon spent 6 weeks in the infirmary with cuts so deep they required surgery to remove all the fragments. But the worst part was what he told us while recovering. He said the thing that grabbed him wasn't his reflection at all. It was something wearing his face, and when he got close enough, he could see what was behind its eyes. The fourth rule governs our movement between our cells and the church for vigils. We have night stairs connecting the second-floor dormitory area to the south transept of the church, as is traditional in Benedictine monasteries. This allows us to descend directly into the church for the 4 a.m. prayer, without disturbing the Great Silence. But here, these stairs may only be used in one direction during the hours of darkness. Down to the church for vigils, never back up until after lauds. Prior Cornelius explained this during one of our weekly community meetings in the chapter house, though his explanation raised more questions than it answered. After vigils ends, you will remain in the church for private prayer and meditation until lauds begins, he said. Do not return to your cells using the night stairs until full daylight has broken. Where do we go if we need to return to our rooms? Asked Brother Jerome, one of the newer arrivals like myself. Use the main entrance and the corridors through the refectory wing. The night stairs climb to different destinations during the darkness. What do you mean? I asked. Prior Cornelius's face went completely pale. They lead to versions of our monastery that existed in different years. Brother Aldrich climbed them backwards once in 1987. He emerged in his cell, but the room was furnished differently, and there was another version of himself already sleeping in the bed. The other Aldrich woke up and started screaming in a voice that didn't match his throat. Prior Cornelius found our brother Aldrich 3 hours later, standing in the corridor holding a handful of teeth that weren't his own. The room fell completely silent. Even Brother Jerome, who'd been skeptical of the monastery's more unusual traditions, looked visibly shaken. Where did the other Aldrich go? I asked. We don't discuss that, Prior Cornelius said firmly. What matters is that our brother Aldrich learned never to climb those stairs in the wrong direction again. I glanced at Brother Aldrich, sitting quietly in the corner. His mouth was slightly open, and I could see gaps where several teeth should have been. The fifth and final rule is the one that haunts me most. If you hear knocking during the Great Silence, You do not answer. No. Matter how urgent it sounds. No. Matter how much it resembles the voice of another brother calling for help, you remain in your cell with the door locked until vigils begins. Brother Magnus told me about this rule after I'd been at St. Mordaunt's for 6 months. We were working together in the workshop, repairing damaged prayer books, when I heard what sounded like someone pounding on the outer monastery doors around 11 p.m. Shouldn't we see who that is? I asked. Someone might need help. Brother Magnus dropped his bookbinding tools and grabbed my wrist with both hands. No, never. During the Great Silence, nothing that knocks should be answered. But what if it's an emergency? What if someone's hurt? Brother Crispin, I've been here 14 years. The knocking happens every few weeks. It sounds like people in distress, like monks calling for assistance, like emergency responders, like family members of the community. It's never any of those things. What is it then? Brother Magnus released my wrist and returned to his work, but his hands were shaking badly enough that he couldn't hold the binding needle steady. 3 years ago, the knocking came around midnight. It sounded exactly like Brother Erasmus calling for help, saying he'd fallen in the garden and broken his leg. The voice was perfect. His accent, his speech patterns, even the way he mispronounces certain Latin phrases. Brother Oswald heard it from his cell and decided to help. What happened? Brother Oswald found Erasmus in the library, reading as usual before sleep. Erasmus had been there for 2 hours and hadn't left his cell except to use the bathroom. When they listened together, the knocking was still happening, and the voice was still calling Erasmus's name, begging him for help. Then who was making the noise? Magnus set down his tools entirely. They crept to the main door and looked through the peephole. There was something standing outside that looked exactly like Brother Erasmus, but its proportions were wrong. The arms were too long, and it was wearing a habit that was soaked with fresh blood. When it saw them looking through the peephole, it smiled, and they could see that all of its teeth had been filed into points. What did they do? They waited until morning. When they opened the door after lauds, there was nothing there except a large pool of blood that looked several hours old. Prior Cornelius had the area blessed and covered with new stones, but every few weeks, the knocking returns. I should have left St. Mordaunt's then. Any reasonable person would have packed their belongings and returned to the outside world. But I was convinced these stories were elaborate hazing for new brothers, or perhaps shared delusions brought on by isolation and the stress of monastic life. I'd spent too many years in accounting, dealing with facts and figures, to accept supernatural explanations. That changed completely 3 weeks ago. It was a Tuesday night in late October. The temperature had dropped below freezing, and snow was beginning to accumulate on the monastery grounds. Compline had ended normally, with Prior Cornelius giving the blessing, and all 12 of us filing out of the church together. I returned to my cell, covered my mirror, drew the curtains, and prepared for sleep. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of crying. At first, it seemed to be coming from outside my window, but as I became more alert, I realized the sound was coming from within the monastery itself. Someone was sobbing quietly, and the sound was moving through the corridors. I knew I should stay in my cell. Every rule I'd learned insisted that I remain locked in my room until vigils. But the crying sounded so genuinely distressed, so human and desperate, that I couldn't ignore it. I opened my door just wide enough to peer into the corridor. The sound was definitely coming from inside the building, and it seemed to be moving toward the church. As I listened, I began to recognize the voice. It was Brother Jerome. Brother Jerome had been struggling with his decision to join the monastery. He'd mentioned during our work periods that he was having doubts about his vocation, wondering if he'd made a mistake leaving his life in the outside world. The crying I was hearing sounded exactly like someone having a complete breakdown. I made a decision that nearly cost me my sanity. I left my cell and followed the sound. The corridors were lit by small emergency lights, that cast long, dim circles of illumination every 20 feet. Between these circles, the darkness was nearly complete. I moved slowly, following the sound of sobbing toward the church. As I walked, I began to notice that the corridors felt longer than they should. I'd made this journey dozens of times during daylight, and it normally took less than 2 minutes to reach the church from my cell. I'd been walking for at least 5 minutes, and the church doors were still nowhere in sight. The crying was getting louder, though, and more desperate. I could hear Brother Jerome's voice saying, "Please, someone help me. I can't find my way back. Please." Finally, I saw the church doors ahead. They were standing wide open, which was completely against the rules. After Compline, those doors should have been closed and locked until vigils. I approached carefully and looked inside. The church was not empty. Brother Jerome was there, but he wasn't alone. There were dozens of other figures in the pews, all wearing the black habits of our order. They sat completely motionless, facing the altar, and in the dim light I could see that some of their habits looked much older than ours, made from different materials and cut in styles I didn't recognize. Brother Jerome was walking between the pews, still crying, seemingly unaware of the other figures. As he passed each one, it would turn its head to watch him. Their movements were perfectly synchronized, like flowers following the sun. "Jerome," I whispered from the doorway. He stopped walking and turned toward me. Even in the dim light, I could see his face clearly, and my stomach dropped. It was definitely Brother Jerome's face, but it was wrong in ways I struggled to describe. His features were slightly larger than they should be, as if someone had inflated them carefully. His eyes were too bright, reflecting light that wasn't there. And when he smiled at me, I saw that his teeth were not quite the right shape. "Crispin," he said, and his voice was exactly right except for a subtle echo, as if two people were speaking his words in perfect unison. "Come help me. I'm lost." All of the figures in the pews turned to look at me at once. They all had Jerome's face. Every single one of them was Brother Jerome, but from different ages, different times, different versions of his life. Some looked younger, some older. Some wore different expressions. Some had scars or injuries that our Jerome had never sustained. But they were all definitely him, and they were all staring at me with that same too bright gaze. "Come in, Crispin," they said in unison, their voices creating a horrible harmony. "Help us find our way back." I ran. I turned and fled down the corridor, not caring about noise or propriety. Behind me, I heard the sound of dozens of people rising from wooden pews at once, and then footsteps following me. Not the footsteps of one person, but many, all moving in perfect rhythm. The corridor back to my cell seemed infinitely long. I ran for what felt like 20 minutes, my lungs burning, the sound of synchronized footsteps echoing behind me. Several times, I passed emergency lights I didn't remember from my journey to the church, and doorways that led to rooms I'd never seen before. Finally, I reached my cell and slammed the door behind me, turning the lock and pressing my back against the wood. The footsteps stopped directly outside my door. Then came the knocking. "Crispin," said Brother Jerome's voice from the hallway. "Please let me in. I'm scared. I can't find my way back to my room." I didn't answer. "Crispin, please. It's really me. I know you saw something strange in the church, but that wasn't me. I've been looking for you. Please open the door." The voice was perfect. It sounded exactly like Jerome, complete with the slight nervousness he always displayed when asking for help. If I hadn't seen what I'd seen in the church, I would have believed it completely. "I know you're in there, Crispin. I can hear you breathing. Please, I'm really frightened. Something's wrong with this place. The corridors keep changing and I can't find my cell. Please help me." I remained silent, though every instinct screamed at me to open the door. The voice sounded so genuinely terrified, so completely human. Then it changed. "Crispin, The voice was still Jerome's, but now it carried an undertone of anger. "I know you're listening. Why won't you help me? I thought we were friends. I thought you cared about your brothers here." The knocking became more insistent. "Crispin, open this door immediately. I order you as your elder in this community." That wasn't right. Jerome had arrived only 2 weeks before me. He had no authority to give me orders. "Brother Crispin." The voice was now cold and commanding, though it still sounded exactly like Jerome. "You will open this door now or face severe consequences. This behavior is completely unacceptable." I pressed myself harder against the door, biting my lip to keep from responding. Then the voice changed again, becoming pleading and desperate. "Crispin, please. They're coming for me. I can see them in the corridor. They all look like me, but they're not me. Please, you have to let me in. They're going to take me back to the church. Please, Crispin. Please." The knocking became frantic, desperate pounding that shook the door frame. "Crispin!" the voice screamed. No, longer sounding entirely human. "Open this door! Let me in! Let me in right now!" The pounding continued for almost an hour, accompanied by screaming that gradually became less and less like Jerome's voice and more like the sound of multiple people shouting in unison. Sometimes the voice would return to normal, pleading softly for help, then explode back into inhuman shrieking. Finally, around 3 a.m., everything went silent. I remained pressed against the door until the bell rang for vigils at 4. When I finally emerged from my cell, I found Brother Jerome in the corridor, looking confused and exhausted. "Crispin," he said, "did you hear all that noise last night? Someone was screaming and pounding on doors for hours. I couldn't sleep at all." I stared at him. He looked completely normal. The right proportions, the right features, eyes that reflected light naturally. "Where were you?" I asked. "In my cell, of course. Where else would I be during the great silence?" "You didn't leave your room at all." "No, why would I? You know the rules." I wanted to ask him about the church, about the figures in the pews, about the knocking on my door. But looking at his genuine confusion, I realized he had no memory of any of it. At vigils that morning, I watched Brother Jerome carefully throughout the entire service. He behaved normally, prayed the Psalms correctly, and showed no signs of the supernatural encounter I'd witnessed. But twice during the service, I caught him looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite identify. And once, just for a moment when he thought I wasn't watching, I saw him smile with teeth that seemed slightly too sharp. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, I've followed every rule perfectly. I stay in my cell during the great silence. I don't look into reflective surfaces after compline. I don't walk the cloister alone after dark. I don't use the night stairs in the wrong direction, but the rules aren't enough anymore. Every night during the great silence, I hear things moving in the corridors. Footsteps that don't belong to any of the brothers. Voices calling my name in languages I don't recognize. Scratching sounds from inside the walls. And twice more, I've heard Brother Jerome crying in the darkness, begging for help, claiming he's lost and can't find his way. I don't open my door anymore. No matter what I hear. But I know that whatever took Brother Jerome that night in the church is learning to mimic him more perfectly each time. Soon, I don't think I'll be able to tell the difference at all. The worst part is that during the day, Brother Jerome continues to act completely normal. He works alongside us, eats meals with us, prays with us, and shows no signs of being aware that anything has changed. But sometimes, when he thinks no one is watching, I see him counting the other brothers, as if he's making sure we're all still here. And every morning after vigils, I find small pools of blood outside my cell door that weren't there the night before. I'm writing this account because I need someone to know what happens at St. Mordaunt's Monastery after Compline. If something happens to me, if I disappear or if I start acting strangely, I need people to understand that not everything wearing a monk's habit in this place is actually a monk. The rules were created to protect us, but I don't think they're working anymore. Something is learning to break them. I should have left St. Mordaunt's immediately after writing that first account. Instead, I've been here for another month, and the situation has deteriorated beyond anything I could have imagined. What I thought was an isolated incident with Brother Jerome has revealed itself to be part of something much larger and more terrifying. The morning after I finished writing part 1, I found Brother Aldrich waiting outside my cell. His ancient face looked even more weathered than usual, and the gaps in his teeth seemed more prominent. "Brother Crispin," he said quietly, "we need to talk." He led me to the tool shed behind the vegetable garden, the one place on the monastery grounds where we could speak privately without being observed from the main buildings. "You've been asking questions," he said without preamble. "I've been trying to understand what happens here at night." Brother Aldrich laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Understanding is a luxury we can't afford. The rules exist to keep us alive, not to satisfy curiosity. But what are we dealing with? What is this place really?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his gnarled hands. Finally, he spoke. "St. Mordaunt's wasn't built as a monastery, Brother Crispin. It was built as a prison." "What do you mean?" "In 1823, a group of Benedictine monks came to Colorado Territory following reports of strange occurrences in this area. Local native tribes had avoided this plateau for generations, claiming it was a place where the dead gathered to practice being alive again. The monks thought they could sanctify the land through prayer and devotion. Brother Aldrich picked up a rusted garden tool and turned it over in his hands. They built the monastery according to traditional plans, but they made modifications, extra walls, specialized rooms. The church was constructed with particular materials and blessed according to rituals that aren't found in any standard liturgical books. They weren't trying to create a house of worship, Brother Crispin. They were trying to create a containment facility." "Containing what?" "The monks discovered that this plateau exists at a convergence point. Multiple versions of reality intersect here, like layers of tissue paper pressed together. During certain hours, under specific conditions, these layers become permeable. Things that should remain separate begin to bleed through." My hands started trembling. "The other versions of Brother Jerome are just the beginning. Every person who has ever lived at St. Mordaunt's leaves an imprint in the convergence. When the barriers weaken during the Great Silence, these imprints can manifest physically. They appear identical to the original person, but they carry memories and experiences from different timelines, different versions of this place." "How long has this been happening?" Brother Aldrich's face grew even more grave. "Since the day the monastery was completed. The original 12 monks who built this place. They're all still here, Brother Crispin, along with every monk who has lived here since. We currently have 47 brothers residing at St. Mordaunt's, though only 12 of them are from our current timeline." The tool shed suddenly felt much smaller and darker. "The rules," I whispered, "were created through trial and error, written in the blood of brothers who didn't survive the learning process. Each rule represents monks who died discovering what happens when you break it. The night stairs that lead to different years? Brother Benedict climbed them in reverse in 1847 and was found 3 days later in his cell, aged 40 years in a single night, babbling about events that wouldn't happen until 1892. The mirrors that show other faces? Sister Catherine looked into one in 1889. Yes, we had nuns here briefly, and saw herself being murdered. The next morning, we found her body in the exact position and condition she'd witnessed in the reflection. Why hasn't anyone left? Why hasn't anyone reported this?" Brother Aldrich gave me a look of deep pity. "Brother Crispin, what makes you think anyone can leave?" Before I could ask what he meant, we heard the bell ringing for terce. Our conversation was over. That afternoon, during our work period, I decided to test Brother Aldrich's claims. I went to Prior Cornelius's office to request a temporary leave of absence, claiming I needed to visit a sick relative. Prior Cornelius listened to my request with no expression on his weathered face. When I finished speaking, he opened a drawer in his desk and removed a thick folder. "Brother Crispin," he said, "I want to show you something." He spread the contents of the folder across his desk. They were letters, dozens of them, all written in my own handwriting. "These are requests you've submitted over the past 8 months," Prior Cornelius said. "Requests to leave St. Mordaunt's for various reasons. Family emergencies, health concerns, spiritual doubts, educational opportunities. You've written them all, but you have no memory of doing so." I stared at the letters. They were definitely in my handwriting, and they contained personal details that only I would know. But I had no recollection of writing any of them. "Every brother who comes to St. Mordaunt's goes through this phase," Prior Cornelius continued. "The part of you that exists in this timeline wants to leave, but the parts of you that exist in the other timelines want to stay. The result is a kind of internal conflict that manifests as selective amnesia. That's not possible. Brother Crispin, you've been having the same conversation with me every few weeks since you arrived. Each time you're genuinely surprised by these letters. Each time you insist you never wrote them. And each time you forget this conversation by the next morning." He opened another folder and showed me detailed notes, all in his handwriting, documenting multiple identical conversations we'd apparently had. The convergence affects memory as well as physical reality. Your mind exists partially in each intersecting timeline, which creates gaps and inconsistencies in your recollections. That's why the rules seem new to you even though you've been told about them repeatedly. I felt sick. How can I trust anything I remember? You can't. None of us can. That's another reason for the rules. They provide structure when our own memories become unreliable. That night, I decided to test the boundaries of what Brother Aldrich had told me. Instead of staying in my cell during the Great Silence, I positioned myself near the main entrance to the monastery. If what he said about being unable to leave was true, I wanted to understand how the restriction worked. The front doors of St. Mordaunt's are massive oak structures, reinforced with iron bands and equipped with heavy modern locks. During the day, they stand open to welcome visitors and delivery personnel. After Compline, they're secured from the inside, or so I thought. When I reached the entrance hall around midnight, I found the doors standing wide open. Cold mountain air was flowing in, carrying the scent of snow and pine. Beyond the threshold, I could see the winding road that led down from our plateau toward the distant town. I approached the doorway carefully and peered outside. The night was clear, with a full moon providing enough light to see the path clearly. Everything looked normal. I stepped outside. The moment my feet crossed the threshold, I found myself standing in the entrance hall again, facing the open doors. Confused, I tried again, walking more deliberately. The same thing happened. One step outside, and suddenly, I was back where I started. On my third attempt, I tried running. I sprinted toward the doorway and leaped through it with as much momentum as I could manage. I landed hard on the stone floor of the entrance hall. "It's not a physical barrier," said a voice behind me. I turned to find Brother Magnus standing in the corridor, watching me with a sympathetic expression. "I tried the same thing my second year here," he said. "The convergence doesn't trap our bodies, Brother Crispin. It traps our possibility. We can't leave because versions of us that succeeded in leaving don't exist in any of the intersecting timelines." "What do you mean?" "Every choice creates branching possibilities. In a normal location, these branches spread out infinitely. Some versions of you become a monk. Others become accountants. Others become completely different people. But here, at the convergence, only certain possibilities can exist simultaneously. The only versions of Brother Crispin that can maintain coherent existence in this location are versions that remain at St. Mordaunt's. But what about monks who left before? The monastery records show brothers who transferred to other communities. Brother Magnus's expression became very sad. Brother Crispin, there are no records of monks leaving St. Mordaunt's. Check again tomorrow. I was about to argue when I heard a sound that made my blood freeze. From somewhere deep in the monastery came the sound of singing. Not the Gregorian chant we use during our liturgical hours, but something much older and more complex. The voices were beautiful but entirely wrong. They were singing in harmony, but the harmonies contained intervals that shouldn't be possible with human voices. The melody seemed to fold in on itself, creating musical structures that hurt to listen to. The 1823 monks, Brother Magnus whispered. They sing every night during the Great Silence. They're still trying to complete the ritual that was supposed to seal the convergence permanently. Did it work? Partially. The convergence is contained within the monastery grounds, which is why the rules are necessary only here. But the seal isn't perfect. Every year, it weakens a little more. The singing grew louder, and I could hear individual voices now. 12 distinct singers, their voices blending in ways that created additional tones that seemed to come from the walls themselves. What happens if the seal fails completely? Brother Magnus looked toward the sound of the singing. Then the convergence expands, first to the town at the bottom of the mountain, then to the surrounding counties, then across the state. Eventually, the entire world becomes like St. Mordaunt's, a place where all possible versions of reality exist simultaneously. That doesn't sound necessarily bad. Brother Crispin, human minds aren't designed to handle multiple realities at once. In the outside world, people go insane when faced with just the possibility that their choices might have led to different lives. Imagine confronting infinite versions of yourself, all equally real, all making different decisions. Imagine trying to maintain a coherent identity when versions of you from timelines where you made different choices are standing in the same room, arguing about which decisions were correct. The singing reached a crescendo, and for a moment I could see translucent figures moving through the corridors. Monks in habits that were slightly different from ours, carrying candles that cast no light, mouths open in that horrible, beautiful song. The original 12 are trying to strengthen the seal, Brother Magnus continued. But they need help. They need the spiritual energy generated by a functioning monastic community to power their ritual. That's why St. Mordaunt's continues to operate as a monastery. We're not just following the rules to protect ourselves. We're providing the spiritual foundation that keeps the convergence from expanding. Then why don't more people know about this? Why isn't there support from the outside? Brother Crispin, who would believe us? And more importantly, knowledge of the convergence creates instability. The more people who know about the multiple realities intersecting here, the weaker the barriers become. Our secrecy isn't just for protection, it's for containment. The singing faded, and the translucent figures disappeared. Brother Magnus and I stood in silence for several minutes. "How long have you known all this?" I asked. "I figured it out gradually over my first few years. But Brother Aldrich told me the full truth after I tried to leave for the 5th time." "How many times have I tried to leave?" "This was your 7th attempt. Each time, you forget until the urge builds up again." I felt a deep sense of despair settling over me. "So we're trapped here forever, maintaining a prison we can't escape, protecting a world that doesn't know it needs protection." "Yes," Brother Magnus said simply. "Welcome to your vocation, Brother Crispin." Over the next 2 weeks, I began to notice details I'd missed before. The way Brother Jerome sometimes paused mid-sentence, as if listening to voices the rest of us couldn't hear. The way Brother Oswald occasionally responded to questions that hadn't been asked. The way Prior Cornelius sometimes conducted conversations with empty air, nodding and responding to comments from invisible participants. And I began to understand that these weren't signs of madness. They were signs of awareness. These brothers had learned to perceive the other versions of our community that existed in the convergence. They were carrying on relationships with monks from different timelines, maintaining connections across multiple realities. The realization both terrified and fascinated me. On a Wednesday night in late November, I decided to break the most important rule of all. After Compline, instead of returning to my cell, I hid in the sacristy adjacent to the church. I wanted to see what happened during the Great Silence when no one was there to witness it. The church after Compline is a different place entirely. As soon as the last monk left and the doors closed, the building began to change. The air grew thicker, more humid, despite the cold weather outside. The candles that we'd extinguished began to flicker back to life, though their flames cast no additional light. And then they arrived. Monks began entering the church through doorways that hadn't existed moments before. They came in small groups, wearing habits from different eras, carrying prayer books written in languages I didn't recognize. Some looked exactly like current members of our community, but from different ages. Others were completely unfamiliar faces. I watched through the slightly open sacristy door as they filled the pews. There were dozens of them, far more than the church should have been able to hold. They arranged themselves according to some system I couldn't understand, with the older-looking monks near the altar and the newer arrivals toward the back. When they were all seated, Prior Cornelius entered through the main doors. But it wasn't the Prior Cornelius I knew. This version was younger, wearing a slightly different style of habit, and he moved with a confidence that our Prior Cornelius had never displayed. He walked to the altar and began speaking in Latin, conducting some kind of ceremony I'd never seen before. As he spoke, the church continued to change. The walls became translucent, and I could see through them to other versions of the same space. Some showed the church as it had been during construction, with workers installing the specialized materials Brother Aldrich had mentioned. Others showed it in states of decay, abandoned and overgrown. One showed it filled with modern equipment I didn't recognize, with monks in white habits instead of black. The ceremony continued for what felt like hours. The assembled monks responded to Prior Cornelius's Latin with phrases that seemed to cause the walls to solidify slightly, the multiple overlapping versions of the church becoming less visible. I was watching a reinforcement of the seal that contained the convergence. As the ritual reached its conclusion, the Prior Cornelius conducting the ceremony looked directly at the sacristy door. His eyes met mine, and he smiled with recognition. "Brother Crispin," he said in perfect English, though he'd been speaking Latin moments before. "You've been very curious about our work here." The assembled monks all turned to look at me. I recognized some faces: Brother Jerome from multiple time periods, several versions of Brother Aldrich, monks who looked like older versions of myself. "Come out, brother," the prior said. "You're ready to understand your true role here." I stepped out of the sacristy on trembling legs. "Each monk who comes to St. Mordaunt's serves two functions," the prior explained. "You maintain the spiritual energy necessary for our containment ritual, and you provide additional variants for the convergence to work with. Every choice you make, every prayer you offer, every moment of doubt or faith, all of it creates new branches of possibility that we can use to strengthen the seal." "I don't understand. Brother Crispin, you think you're trapped here, but the truth is more complex. You chose to come here across multiple timelines, following an instinct you didn't understand. Part of you knew what this place was and what it needed. You're not a prisoner, you're a volunteer." One of the monks in the pews stood up. It was an older version of myself, probably in his 60s, wearing the robes of a senior monk. "I've been here 43 years, he said to me. "I've seen the convergence grow stronger and more stable as each new brother joins our community. Every monk who enters St. Mordaunt's becomes part of the solution." "But the rules," I said. "The dangers, the things that happen during the Great Silence are real." the prior acknowledged. The convergence is not a safe phenomenon. Monks do die here when they break the rules. Monks do get lost between timelines or consumed by the entities that leak through from other realities. But these risks exist so that a much greater catastrophe can be prevented. What happens to the monks who die? They become part of the seal. Their spiritual energy, their commitment to the community, their sacrifice, all of it gets incorporated into the containment system. In a sense, no monk who comes to St. Mordaunt's ever truly leaves. The older version of myself walked over to stand beside me. Brother Crispin, you've been asking the wrong question. You keep wondering how to escape this place. The right question is, how can you help make it stronger? I looked around the church at the dozens of monks from different timelines, all united in their commitment to maintaining the convergence seal. The responsibility was overwhelming. What do I need to do? Continue following the rules, the prior said. Continue participating in our liturgical life. Continue growing in your understanding of monastic discipline. And when you're ready, begin helping us teach the rules to new brothers who will arrive after you. More monks are coming? Brother Crispin, St. Mordaunt's will always need new brothers. The spiritual work we do here requires constant renewal. Every generation of monks contributes their energy to the seal, but eventually, that energy needs to be refreshed. You are part of a cycle that has been continuing for 200 years and will continue for as long as humanity needs protection from the convergence. The ceremony concluded, and the monks from other timelines began filing out through their mysterious doorways. As they left, the church returned to its normal appearance, solid walls replacing the translucent barriers that had allowed me to see into other realities. The older version of myself was the last to leave. As he walked past me, he paused. Brother Crispin, you're going to forget most of what happened here tonight. The human mind can't retain memories of direct contact with other timelines without risking madness. But part of you will remember the important things. That our work here matters, that the rules exist for good reasons, and that you chose this life for purposes greater than your own understanding. Will I see you again? Every night during the Great Silence, I'll be working alongside the original 12, maintaining the seal. And someday, when you've been here long enough, you'll join us in that work too. He walked through a doorway that closed behind him, leaving me alone in the church. I returned to my cell and slept deeply for the first time since arriving at St. Mordaunt's. The next morning I woke with only fragments of memory from the night before. I remembered hiding in the sacristy and seeing monks from other timelines, but the details were fuzzy and dreamlike. What remained clear was a sense of purpose I hadn't felt before. At breakfast, Prior Cornelius, the version from my timeline, approached me. Brother Crispin, I have a request. Brother Aldrich is getting too old to handle orientation for new arrivals. I'd like you to take over that responsibility. What would that involve? Teaching them the rules, helping them understand the importance of following our traditions exactly, making sure they integrate successfully into our community. I thought about the fragments of memory from the night before, about the older version of myself who had spent 43 years maintaining something he couldn't fully explain to the outside world. I'd be honored, Prior. Excellent. We have a new brother arriving next week. His name is Brother Vincent, and he's coming to us from a very different background. He'll need careful guidance. As Prior Cornelius walked away, I felt a strange sense of completion, as if pieces of a puzzle I hadn't known I was solving were finally falling into place. That afternoon, I found Brother Aldrich in the tool shed where we'd had our first serious conversation. You remember now, he said. It wasn't a question. Some of it. Enough. And you understand your role here? I think so. We're guards, aren't we? Guarding against something that could destroy the world if it got loose. Brother Aldrich smiled, and for the first time since I'd known him, the expression looked genuinely peaceful. Welcome to St. Mordaunt's, Brother Crispin. Welcome to your real vocation.